So let's take an in-depth look at some of the functionality of Mesh and how we can generate some pretty interesting effects very simply in a very efficient manner. So we've got this scene here, we've got a couple of items in there already. We've got the little cube there we saw at the beginning, and we're going to set up a mesh network. And in doing this, we have the heart of the mesh network, which is your distribute node, and this just determines how many instances you have. It defaults to linear, so it's just got 10 instances that have been created of this, and we ran it in mesh mode, which means you can actually generate a single mesh even though we've got 10 instances here. So you've got lots of controls. So all these sliders that you see me pulling around here, they're all animatable functions. So we've switched the distribute node to a radial mode, so we can adjust the quantity of instances here. So we can ramp this up to say 5,000, so we can have a very large number. We still have great performance, and we can then go in and start tweaking the values. So the angle, for instance, we can change the Z offset value here. We can change the radius. And as I said, all of these values are animatable, so you can use these to generate some pretty interesting effects. So there's also a grid mode. So you can very easily populate a grid in all directions. It doesn't just have to be two-dimensional. And then in the scene here, we're actually going to be using a separate mesh as an influence for how we place these instances in the scene. So by doing this, we simply drag and drop our sphere that we've got here in the scene to our input mesh within the distribute node. So if we ramp up the quantity to 5,000, you'll see that they've scattered themselves all over. So we're in scatter mode currently. We can switch it by vertex. So if we then adjust the number of instances, it's done by point order, so we get a nice ordered distribution of the vertices. We can do this as a random order as well. So we can do it by random vertex. So now you'll see that they're appearing in a random order all over that sphere. And we can also flood the mesh as well. So this will basically put an instance per vertex on the mesh. We can also do it by voxel space. So this essentially is filling the volume of the object. So if we hide the sphere, we can see that it's actually filled that whole volume inside the sphere with the instances. So if we go back to our mesh network now, we're going to switch this back to random vertice, and we're going to start playing around with some other settings in Mesh. So we added a visibility node here, and we're actually going to use a texture to drive where these instances are appearing on the sphere. So we've got this map of the world here as a specular map, and you'll see here that it's changed which of those instances are actually visible, but it's not quite looking right at the moment, and this is simply because we need to adjust the map projection. So at the moment it's just in the y-axis. If we middle click and drag this sphere over as a map helper, this will actually match the UVs of the sphere. So now we see that the world actually looks correct as we orbit around it. So finally, I just want to add a bit of spinning to this, so I can add a transform node in Mesh, and I've got a locator in the scene which already has some animation on it, so I can drag and drop this locator over to the controller null input of that transform node. So if we do this and then hit play, you'll see that it inherits the animation of that locator. So now that we've done that, we can start to have some fun with this. So we can go in and add things like some noise to this, which generates a very simple particle style effect. And again, this is all running in real time in the viewport. So there's lots of different options available to us with the signal node. We can loop the noise, we can add Brownian motion. So we've deleted that node, and we're going to now go in and add some audio as a driver. So we're just going to bring in a WAV file, and then we're going to apply this as a driver for the scale of our instances. So we're going to really ramp up the value so we can actually see the effect happening. And then under the frequency graph settings, we have the number of bands or channels that are being driven by the audio. So the more bands that we have in terms of quantity, this will drive more effects. So as we hit play now, we'll see that the scale of the instances essentially are giving us a very interesting looking graphic equalizer effect on the spinning globe. So if we want to make this scene look a little bit more interesting, something to point out in the content browser you can actually load some mesh presets from our examples tab in the content browser. So this helps you learn how mesh works, and you can load in some predetermined examples, and so you can use it as a starting point or to help beef up some of your animation in your scene. So here we're just adding some extra mesh networks that we already have to just add a bit more substance to this example here. We're just going to loop the timing of this so it populates our entire scene. And if we play this through now, you see we've got something quite interesting looking. So because the mesh network's all live, it's very easy for us to switch out these objects. So you can do this in both instance mode, and you can also do it in mesh mode. So if we see here, we've added another sphere there, and we can switch it out instead of the cube. So if we hit play now, you see that that scale effect is working on the spheres instead of the flat cubes that we had before. And if we change it from spectrum to average on our audio node, we get this very interesting kind of spiky hedgehog effect on our planet.